Welcome to the Generous Benefits Podcast, where we talk about building benefits that actually help people and still make business sense. I'm your host, Amanda Brummitt. Today, we are digging into something every employer deals with, open enrollment. Employees approach it with confusion, assumptions, and stress, and maybe employers often miss simple opportunities to make the experience easier and more effective. Our guest today is Tracy Daniels of Generous Benefits. Tracy works directly with employers and employees during open enrollment and has a unique view into what people think, what they misunderstand, and what they wish their employees would do differently. Let's jump in. Tracy, thank you so much for being here today. I know that our plans are all over the place and all over the calendar year, but that the majority of our clients just went through open enrollment. So I thought, while it was fresh on your mind, I would pick your brain about all the things we could do better. But first, before we do that, for our listeners that don't already know you, tell us who you are personally and professionally.
So I'm Tracy Daniels. I am an account manager here at Generous Benefits. So I've been with Generous Benefits for about 3 years and manage all of our clients, their renewals, their open enrollments, helping their employees through that, as well as the employer day-to-day account management needs, and just kind of all of the client service things. So,
Okay, well, let's start with misconceptions. What are the most common ones that employees have going into their open enrollment?
yeah, I think open enrollment is one of those timeframes where everybody knows it's important, but not everybody feels equipped to handle it. And I think sometimes when you're stressed, you lean towards the misconceptions or assumptions, things that you've heard, and then you kind of run into trouble.
Yeah.
So, some of the most common things that I hear are, employees will say, I don't think there's anything I need to do before open enrollment. There's nothing that I really need to look at. That one's a little bit more of, it's not a hard deadline, but there are things that if you do ahead of time are going to make your life a lot easier. One of the things that I suggest is looking at your benefits that you have currently. So where are you at and where do you want to be? Did you meet your deductible? Did you meet your out of pocket? Was it too much for you? Was it too little coverage for you? So that you have that baseline and you know where you need to go. And then when you actually get to open enrollment, it's easier to make that decision.
That's good.
Yeah, and then you're making an informed decision versus just kind of winging it. Personal information, it's easier to gather it ahead of time. I have 2 daughters. I don't know their socials. I have to look it up every time.
Me either.
It's so hard to memorize them all. And so, when you get to open enrollment, you have to have those if you're enrolling them. And if you're in the middle of it and you have to stop because you need to go find things, it just kind of, delays the time. And then logging in as well. I think a lot of employees will log in once for open enrollment and then they kind of wash their hands of it. They don't log back in until next year. And now they don't remember the username or the password. And so making sure that you log in and you're in the system and everything is okay before is going to save you some frustration later as well. So,
yeah. And then quick follow-up question on the deductible. Where do they go to find that?
So their deductible, they can actually view it when they log into the member portal. Sometimes it's on their card, their ID card. It just depends on the carrier. And then the easiest way is actually to look in our system. They can view all of their benefits at any point during the year. So folks that don't log in other than open enrollment, there's a lot of useful information that's in the portal that if they need to access it during the year, it would probably be pretty helpful.
Okay, nice.
I think a lot of employees also think they don't need to log in. If they're keeping everything the same, why log in? And there's a couple issues with that. Not all employers are going to roll over your coverage. The majority probably will, but some of them will not. So if you choose not to log in, then you may not have benefits for the next year. So you want to make sure you know what your employer, goes by. The other thing is, if there's a carrier change, it's not possible to just roll you over. So they're going to, essentially go in, see what the most comparable plan is, and then they're going to put you in that. But maybe you don't agree with what, is the most similar plan. So it complicates it. And the other reason you need to be logging in is address, any personal information. If that changes, your ID cards aren't going to go to the right place. Throughout the year, if we move, that's just such a big thing, that there's so many things that go with it and things that you need to get done that updating your benefits portal probably isn't the top thing on your list. But if you don't, now your ID cards are going to go to the wrong place. So logging in, making sure everything's accurate is a huge reason to do that. I think a lot of employees also assume nothing's changing.
Mm.
It's just kind of the assumption. And
It used to be that way.
yeah, yeah, it used to be easier to just push everything forward. You didn't really see as much of a change. And some of that is a good thing. It's because there are so many options and we're constantly tailoring everything to the employer so that you have what you need. But typically, there's always going to be a change. It may not be, screaming in your face change, but there's going to be change. The carriers are always going to increase premiums some. So the payroll deductions, there's going to be a shift. It may be a major change. Maybe your employer is going from one medical carrier to another. So that's a huge change you want to pay attention to. But even for the employees that they see the plans are the same, I'm in this gold PPO and I just want to stay in it. And there it is, it's available this year. The carriers always tweak for the most part those plans. So a 2025 plan compared to a 2026 plan is going to have really, usually minor, but it's going to have tweaks.
Mm.
Usually you'll see the copays will climb up just a little bit. It may only be like $5. But you'll see your deductibles sometimes go, from 1,500 to 1,750. Your out of pocket may climb just a little bit. So you want to make sure that even if you see the same plan options, that you look and see what's changed within it and that plan is still going to work for you for the next year. I would suggest utilizing all of the resources that are available to you, benefit guides, emails, so that you know exactly what those changes are.
Yeah, most definitely.
And as far as updating benefits, I get a lot of, hey, Tracy, I thought I could change this, mid-year. Oh, Tracy, I'm not really sure which plan I want, but since I can update it later, it's not a big deal. And that one makes me cringe because enrollment is the only time you can update your benefits and do anything you want to do unless you have a qualifying life event. So marriage, birth, gain of coverage or loss of coverage, those are the things that allow you to change your benefits outside of open enrollment. And if you don't have one of those things, you are stuck. So it's really important to make sure that you do make intentional decisions that are going to be, what you need throughout the year. They're going to sustain you for the whole year, because if you don't have a change or, qualifying life event, then you are going to have to stick with what you chose.
Does that include dropping coverage? Like maybe I just no longer want it or can no
Yes.
longer afford it? Okay.
Yes. So if you select a plan that's too expensive for you and you just all of a sudden it's like, Tracy, I just can't do this. And that has happened. Unless you have one of those qualifying life events, you can't drop it. And so that's a big one to consider. Can I afford all of the things that I've chosen and go from there? And I think, one of the misconceptions with costs is the lowest premium plan is going to be the cheapest.
Mm.
And that sounds a little confusing, but when you're looking at those plans, it is going to be the lowest premium. But what are the costs associated with that plan? You may not intend to have any type of medical emergency, but I don't think anybody does. You need to think bottom line, if I do have something come up that's unplanned, how am I going to be able to handle that? Because those premium savings going from, the lowest, cheapest plan to maybe the middle one can be eaten up pretty fast. One emergency is going to eat up those savings, and you would have been better to just choose maybe the next plan up. So it's good to just be aware of that as well.
Sure. That makes sense.
And I think, when you're looking at all of these options, so many employees just assume I've got to do this all by myself. I have all this information, but now I just have to figure it out alone. And we're here. We're here for questions. We expect questions. I love when employees ask me questions, because if you're asking me, you're making an informed decision. And I know that's going to be better for you and truthfully for me in the long run, because you're going to be set up with benefits that are going to be sustainable.
And I know the answer to this already, but I have to ask. They can reach out to you and ask anything they want confidentially. You're not telling anybody, their boss, their insurance provider.
Yeah, no, they can reach out at any time, and we're always available. We can do a phone call. We can do secure email. We can do, there's a lot of different options within our system. We even have some links that are built into our system where they can just get to someone right away. But it's always confidential. We don't share any kind of medical information or anything like that with anybody. So
Nice.
yeah. Yeah. And I think, the last thing that I would probably say comes up a lot is, I've got a lot of time. I have time to do this. I'll probably look at it next week. Time, it goes by very fast. Open enrollment is a really short time frame. And so it feels like you have a lot of time, but you usually don't have as much as what you think. The average time frame that we do is about 10 days. And so I think the best thing to do is just put some time on your calendar, block it off, maybe 15 or 30 minutes. That way it's set. You've got that time that you're going to sit down and handle it, and you don't risk that you're procrastinating and possibly missing the window altogether.
Yeah, that is great advice. Okay, so we know some misconceptions now and rather what we should do in their place. What about frustrations that employees voice and what are the consistent ones that come up and why?
I think the biggest thing is information overload.
Mm.
The information is very complex. It's very dense information, and they're receiving so much of it that it just feels very overwhelming. It's very hard for them to digest. And what happens is when that they feel that overwhelm, they either put it off because they don't want to deal with it. Maybe they end up missing the window completely, or they just say, you know what, I'm just going to leave everything the same. I'm not going to update it because it's just easier. And sometimes that's okay. And the options that you had are still going to be the best options for you, but they aren't always. And so we really want to make sure that we're giving them information that's digestible. And I think sometimes employers look at it as the more information, the better. But I think it's how it's presented, making sure that whatever's being given to them is clear but also concise. I think a lot of employees are frustrated just by some of the pressure, the fear of making the wrong choice. These benefits have to be, like I said, sustainable for the next year, cost wise as well as coverage wise. The fear of making the wrong choice can be a lot. Just to internalize. They also, poor communication is a big complaint. Are you communicating to them what the deadlines are, when open enrollment's going to be, what the changes are? Because if they feel like they don't have all of the information, it just adds to the stress.
Yeah.
And there's time pressure. Open enrollment, like I said before, the window's small. 10 days isn't that long to decide the next year.
Mm.
And they, often they're simultaneously trying to coordinate a spouse's open enrollment. Maybe the dates don't line up. That's a really common scenario. And those situations, qualifying life events can come into play. But when they're trying to figure out, okay, my wife's open enrollment is next week, mine is now, it just adds to that time pressure.
Yeah.
And they just feel even more overwhelmed. And so, again, communicating those deadlines is at least going to help somewhat with that, help them plan. And that's also where making sure you can get into the system comes into play. If you've got 10 days, you've maybe procrastinated a little bit, and now you can't get into the system, your login doesn't work, we can absolutely help, but you feel even more overwhelmed because now, everything feels like it's just going wrong. And so that's where that really kind of comes into play.
And just, I'm going to be defensive of you guys for a second. You all don't work in the middle of the night. You don't work on weekends. So we can't help you on Friday night if the deadline is Monday.
Supposed to be. Supposed to be. Some of us might be a little guilty of that.
Hey,
Yeah.
y'all don't be bothering Tracy on the roof dance.
Yeah, I think, it's funny because a lot of the time that's when they're looking at those benefits because we have kids and we have work and that's the time of night, it's quiet, the kids are asleep. That's when I'm going to look at my benefits. But now I'm stuck. I can't get in. I haven't tried since last year and nobody's available to help. So it gets frustrating. And sometimes it's a tech thing. They have too many logins. They've got one for payroll and they've got one for benefits. And so keeping track of all of the different logins and software they need to use, that can be overwhelming in itself.
Definitely. Well, and that is a great segue into what can employers do to make open enrollment easier, clearer, less stressful?
Yeah, I think there's a lot of things that they can do. First of all, as far as the information goes, I think it's important to communicate early and often and send them the teasers, the reminders, open enrollment is coming. The more prepared that they feel, the less stressed they feel. So that is very important. It's not that we need to dial back communication, but we need to be very intentional with the communication. Make sure that you're giving them bite-sized pieces of information. It's easier to digest, it's clear, it's concise. A benefit guide that's 100 pages, they're not going to sit down and read it cover to cover. They don't have the time. And what they're going to end up doing is just making decisions, just off the top of their head because they haven't actually sat down and looked at that. So when you're creating things like that, make sure that you're thinking about the time it's going to take to look at that. Sometimes a flyer, a shorter version of a benefit guide is better. But making sure, the information is clear, concise, and simplified. Don't use a lot of lingo that they don't understand. There's a lot of acronyms, with many. So many, so many. I think, when I first started doing this, I sat down with Brett and we had a whole call just about acronyms and lingo and all of those things. And so they don't know what those things mean. So if you're pumping them full of this information that they have to Google all of these terms, it's not helping them. They're becoming very overwhelmed. So just really simplifying everything. I think a highlight sheet is super helpful, whether it's part of that benefit guide or just a simplified flyer, an email, or a live meeting where you're going over the changes. It makes it front and center. That's the core of what they really need to know. And then you're eliminating some of the time that it's going to take for them to figure that out. Providing multiple ways to learn. Every company is very diverse. You've got different learning styles amongst employees. So I think that's important to acknowledge. If you're doing a live open enrollment meeting as well as written benefit guides, a video, you're actually able to reach all of those different learning styles. And I think that helps as well. Another thing that I think is really important is decision support. You can't just give them all these written documents. Those are super important. They have their place. But decision support just gives them the next level that they need. So things like a Q&A session after, a live Zoom, or making sure they have comparison tools. When they use our system, they can compare all of the plans very easily. Those things, they give them the leg up to where they feel supported and it's easier to understand, the difference between the plans. And that can be a frustration for them, trying to figure out the difference between everything, but also translating the benefit package into their personal need. We're giving them these are all the options available to you. But they're sitting back and they're going, well, okay, but for my specific situation, I have a medically fragile child, or I'm going to have a newborn soon. They need help being able to translate that into what they need. And those decision support tools are going to help them be able to do that. So I think it's important to normalize asking for help. If the employer normalizes that, they're going to be more comfortable coming to us, asking us questions. I don't want them to be afraid to go to the broker. I think sometimes they're confused. Should I go to my HR manager first? Should I go to the broker? Should I go to both? We want to normalize asking for help because we have a lot more experience with this. This is what we do. And so we fully expect questions and we welcome them. And I think the only other thing that really comes to mind for employers would be streamlining technology. I guess if they have too many logins, too many platforms, that can be overwhelming. Sometimes it's not possible. Different things integrate and some don't. But wherever you can, I think it's really important to try to streamline everything so that it simplifies the process for them.
Yeah, most definitely. And then, Tracy, if you had to pick just one thing going into the next year that employers would change to have the biggest impact on an easier open enrollment, what would it be?
I think the message for me this year is simplify and support. So simplify the information, your systems, consolidating those, being clear and concise. It's less chaos. It's less confusion. Making sure they have the tools that they need because what they're looking for is a personalized experience. They're looking for the tools and the communication that's going to make it easier for them to make those decisions. And I think removing the complexity of everything is really what's at the root of most of the frustrations.
Yeah. And then I'm going to add one question for anybody that's not a generous benefits client, so they don't already know what to expect. But what support should people expect from their brokerage during open enrollment? Like, is this all HR's job? Is it all your job? Is it a dance between the two?
I think it's a little bit of a dance, but I would say in terms of benefits, you really want to lean on your broker. It's important to me for my clients that they have, all of the access to me that they need. So an HR manager is going to be very helpful for things, directly at the group level. But if it's a benefit question, plans, they typically don't know all of the answers to those details. Plan designs, networks, those kinds of questions, they really need to be going to the broker and feeling comfortable doing that. We're always available by email. Like I said, by phone call, we can set up Zoom calls. I think they should expect the broker to support them the entire process. And I think it would be a red flag if they were feeling like they were a little bit in the dark or they weren't accessible. I think it's a red flag if they don't answer phones, if they're not quickly answering emails. Those kind of things are things you want to watch out for and make sure that you feel supported.
Okay. Yeah, that's super helpful. Well, Tracy, thank you for your passion every day. Thank you for all of the joy and love that you pour into Generous Benefits and our clients. And thanks for taking time to make open enrollment a little bit clearer for all of us.
Thank you for having me. I appreciate it.
That was Tracy Daniels with Generous Benefits. Here's the bottom line. Employees want clarity, simplicity, and communication that feels human. When employers remove guesswork, avoid jargon, and help people understand options, participation improves and frustration drops. If you heard something today that made you think your open enrollment could be clearer or more supportive, start there. A few small changes can shift the entire experience. Thanks for listening.